All right, Greg, so are we in the, hey, it's a first game, you're going to go through some of these things frame of mind, or is there some real cause for concern at this point?
Oh, I don't. I'm not really sure. There's a last week in a lot of ways was expected, and I hope I laid that out well enough for you a week ago. That Arkansas State had weapons that were going to bother Nebraska, and I go back to the Huskers starting those new corners in Jackson and Lee, that they were going to take some lumps, and I think the defense did. Now Bob Diaco is quick to point out that, all right, well the scoreboard says 36, that his defense was only responsible for 27 of them because of the punt return and the safety. There's 9 points that the other team got. Now, that's a pretty good spin on it, but the other spin back toward him would be, well, Nebraska might have been lucky to only allow 36 because 2 different times Arkansas State dropped touchdown passes and had to settle for field goals on drives. So there's 8 more points they could have had on the board, and thank goodness they didn't get those, or that result might have been different. I had a lot of respect for Arkansas State going into that game, but the team that had won 5 of the last 6 conference titles. They had some veteran guys back that I knew would give Nebraska fits, and I knew Nebraska's youth would show itself in that game, and all those things happened. I think this defense is going to take 4 to 5 games to really lock in to playing the new scheme and getting some of these new faces up to speed a little bit. And so I hope Husker fans are kind of ready for that bumpy ride, and that's probably going to continue tomorrow with this game with Oregon as well.
I think you even saw some progression of this defense, Greg, from the first half to the second half, because I thought there were times in the first half the defense looked tired, and I thought they also looked like they were out of sorts as well, but you didn't see as much of that in the second half.
There were some adjustments made. Those little bubble screens, those wide receiver screens, Nebraska adjusted. They brought the corners up a little tighter, but what then that did afterwards was open up the middle.
Yeah. And
then Arkansas State adjusted in the fourth quarter, started running those routes over the middle and making completions to guys, and that's how they adjusted in the fourth quarter. So you go to the third quarter where there was a goose egg put up by the defense. You like that. Well, then Arkansas State made some adjustments, and they're a well-coached team. Blake Anderson does a great job for them. So it was a cat-and-mouse game last week. The unfortunate thing for Nebraska is they had to show an awful lot to get that win in the win column, where Oregon got to sit back last week and kind of just play cat-and-mouse with their opponent and kind of do what they wanted to. And so Nebraska had to reveal a few cards in the game last week.
We talked 3-4, 3-4, 3-4, but as we saw with this defense, there's going to be a lot of different looks that aren't always going to be 3-4.
Absolutely. I mean, there'll be times that you'll see four down linemen down. And that's the beauty of it. Like Bob Diaco said, he goes, it's not going to be 100% three-man front. He goes, it will be more three-man front than 4, but you'll see 4-man fronts with what he likes to do defensively as well. And so I like that. I like that the defense can be adaptable, can move around a little bit, can be a little bit unpredictable. I like all those things. And I think you'll see more and more of the onion peeled back as we move through this season.
Let's go to the offensive side, and the big plus, no doubt, and big stars go to Trey Bryant and his ability to run the football and run with some power as well.
Huge. He was terrific. How about him out-rushing his whole yearly total from last year in week 1? I mean, he was just really good. He ran strong. His vision was very good. He seemed to find the holes nicely last week. If you ask me if anything surprised me last week, Jeff, it'd be the fact that he got 31 carries. And I never saw that coming. I thought this thing would be really divided up between him and Wilbon and Ozigbo, who didn't get 1 carry in the game last week. And as close as that race was through August, that's the thing that surprised me the most. And really, 31 carries is an awful lot for a guy in week 1. He was really hobbling as he left the field the other night and couldn't practice on Sunday or Monday for Nebraska just to try to heal up a little bit. So that surprised me. I would think Nebraska would want to spread the carries out a little bit more as they move through this season.
Let's talk about the offensive line. I mean, obviously, with the running game the way it was, they opened up some tremendous holes and did some great things at times. They had a couple of big misses, one on a sack and one on the safety.
Yeah, those were 2 plays. Other than that, Tanner was pretty clean most of the night. Just the ones. And as we mentioned last week, Arkansas State's defensive front was pretty good. It'll be one of the better defensive fronts we'll see it throughout the season. It was Big Ten-like up front for them, and so to only allow 1 sack, I thought was pretty good. One of the things for the offense that was disappointing to me was Arkansas State was getting some momentum in that fourth quarter, and the offense had that big 3-and-out late in the game. That's where you need to bow up and go kill some clock and run the football, and they weren't able to do it there. And that, to me, was disappointing that they couldn't do that, and some of that's on the offensive line.
Let's talk about Tanner Lee, 19 of 32, a couple of touchdown passes, no interceptions, and I thought for the most part made some nice throws. A couple of forced balls, but I think you're going to expect that from a quarterback getting in there the first time.
I'd give him a solid B. People go, wow, you're a tough grader. Well, I've seen him be better than that in practice. So it was fine. He managed the game really well. Nebraska never, flirted with getting a delay a game penalty. They had to call a timeout one time to avoid that. I thought that was a quick clock operator that got Nebraska at one point. But you're right on a couple of those throws. I think maybe in the first one or two that he made, he crossed his body back over the middle. That is a cardinal sin for a quarterback. You can't do that. Good defenses would have picked that off and taken that back the other way, so he's got to avoid that.
Stanley Morgan had his usual solid game. I really liked what I saw from Tyler Hoppus in that game.
Tyler Hoppus had a great camp and looks like he can be a guy who can be a weapon for this football team. Made a tremendous catch down near the goal line for Nebraska and then nearly had a touchdown later. I think the ball may have just gotten deflected and kind of threw him off a little bit. But I think he'll be a nice addition to this offense as far as weapons. And, boy, with some injuries that did happen in week one, you're going to need guys like Hoppus to continue to step up.
Some good and some bad on the special teams, clean from the kicking game from the standpoint of the field goals, 2 for 2 there, but a kickoff out of bounds. Then, of course, you talked about the punt return allowed for the touchdown, followed by the J.D. Spielman kickoff return for the touchdown. So kind of a mixed bag for the special teams as well.
You nailed it. There was lots to like and things to work on. And, again, that goes back to week one and trying to iron some things out. And that's going to be a big part of this Oregon game as well. They're really good in that phase of the game. And so Nebraska knows they got to keep kind of buttoning that part of this phase of the game up.
You mentioned injuries. Greg DeMornay with his shoulder, David Neville with an ankle. What's their status going into the Ducks game?
Neville, I would say, is doubtful, and DeMornay is probably questionable. And so, you got a wide receiving core that's pretty skimpy as it is, losing some guys during the fall camp, and Keon Williams is still not back. And if DeMornay can't go, you like what you got out of Tyjon Lindsey. He would get more snaps in the game. But what's behind him? I mean, it's getting a little thinner and thinner back there. Plus, if DeMornay can't go, that affects your punt return game. You put Stanley Morgan back there, but he's not the threat that DeMornay is in returning punts and may be able to score off any given kick. So we'll keep a real eye on DeMornay during warm-ups tomorrow to see if he can go. David Neville, though, I don't think can play, and so that means Matt Farniak, step on up. It's your time to shine.
Sioux Falls native, yep.
Absolutely. He got a couple of snaps last week, and he worked with the ones throughout this week in practice.
All right. Okay, let's talk about the trip to Eugene. The conditions could be interesting because of the wildfires that they've been having up at the Pacific Northwest, and we caught a little bit of that in terms of some of the air quality in this part of the world. What are we expecting condition-wise for this kickoff tomorrow afternoon?
It's gotten quite a bit better throughout the week. It may kind of smoke up a little bit tomorrow. The temperatures have dropped off quite a bit, which has helped, and they had a little bit of rain in the area, which helped douse a few of those fires. But they're saying that tomorrow could be a little bit smoky in the area, but not enough to affect the game. So everything's as is. It should go off without a hitch. I think the football team has been able to they know what's going on, but they've been able to basically been told throughout the week, we're playing, be ready, get yourself prepared. We're heading out, first road trip of the year.
Nebraska catching Oregon, about the same spot on the schedule as they did last year, but things completely different. First time in 20 years, the Ducks not in the preseason poll. Of course, they got a new head coach in Willie Taggart, new sophomore quarterback in Justin Herbert. They've got some guys back, but this is not the same Oregon team we saw in Lincoln last year.
No, there are some differences, although they do have 8 starters back on both sides of the ball. So they have probably a lot more experience than Nebraska has going into this game. In fact, I was going through my notes from last year. They started 3 either freshmen or redshirt freshmen along the offensive line a year ago in Lincoln. Well, all those kids are back in as sophomores, and they have their left tackle back who did not play in the game in Lincoln last year. It's a 4-8 team, but it's a 4-8 team in my eyes with an asterisk because they're only a couple of years removed from being a national power, and they have some of those parts still with this team. And the big one is that Royce Freeman, who Nebraska caught a huge break last year when he got hurt after only 5 carries and came out of the game and didn't come back. So kind of in the experience meter, they dwarfed the Huskers in that realm, and in some ways have flipped roles from last year to this year.
And remember, without Freeman, who, by the way, rushed for 4 scores against Southern Utah last week, without Freeman, they still ran for 336 yards against the Huskers last year.
Benoit, who is back, had a 100-yard gain. Brooks James is back. He had the kickoff return a week ago for them, a 100-yard kickoff return. So they've got 3 terrific running backs. And when you think of Oregon, people think of Oregon's offense They think, oh, they're just throwing it all over the place. Well, that's not necessarily true. They really predicate this offense off running the football first and then setting the pass up. And so Nebraska's plan is going to have to be limit the run. You're not going to be able to stop it, but limit what they can do in the run game. If they're picking up 4, 5, 6 yards a chunk, it could be a long day for the Blackshirts. So I know the emphasis all week has been we've got to defend the run and limit the run game for Oregon and try to make them throw it more because they really lack some depth in their wide receiver spots.
Well, yeah, and with a sophomore quarterback back there, you've got to make him try to beat you.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I mean, we didn't see him in Lincoln. He took over, started the last 7 games of their year last year. Herbert is a big, tall guy. Reminds me a little bit of Tanner Lee. He's 6'6", 225, big arm. He can move a little bit. He's got a little bit of the ability to tuck it and go. I mean, there are whispers, Jeff, around Eugene of Marcus Mariota. I mean, you don't throw that name around very often. They love Herbert. They think he is the star of the future. They think he's their guy for the next 3 years, and I'm anxious to see him play. But I'm with you. I think Nebraska's got to try to make him beat us with his arm because Charles Nelson's a really good wide receiver.
Yeah.
But outside of that, they drop off with some true freshmen that are playing that spot, some really untested guys. And so, again, to me, it comes down to that run game in this one.
And Oregon didn't have a clean game either. Yeah, they put up 77 points, but this is a team that committed 12 penalties, and you can say maybe it was a sloppy game because of the score differential, but they also turned it over a couple of times as well.
They did. I mean, it was far from perfect. The only thing I would say is that I think they knew they were by far the superior team, probably coasted in certain phases of the game and held a lot of stuff back to not reveal to Nebraska. But, yeah, they've had penalty issues the last couple of years out there. That's one thing they're going to need to get cleaned up. Nebraska had some penalty problems in week 1 as well. And so for the Huskers, you've got to really maintain that. That's an area of the game you want to try to win tomorrow is make sure you're the least penalized team in this one.
And a new defensive approach, and boy, did they need it. One of the 10 worst defenses in college football last year.
Yeah, and they got a good one in Jim Leavitt, who really helped get Colorado's program back up and running as he was the DC there the last couple of years. And Colorado had that amazing season last year. Leavitt, also a former head coach at South Florida, where Willie Taggart was. So it's like the South Florida wave has come and invaded Eugene, Oregon, with both Taggart and Leavitt out there. Leavitt's really highly thought of, running the 3-4, which is what Oregon ran all those years until last year when Sir Brady Hoke showed up on the scene and became their DC and flipped them to a 4-3. They're back to the 3-4, which is really what they've been recruiting to be for many, many years.
So I think the takeaway, Greg, is for people that maybe have questions or concerns about this team, we'll know much more after this game tomorrow.
It's a great measuring stick for Nebraska. Going on the road, taking this young football team on the road, how can they handle this loud environment of Autzen Stadium? Even though it only seats 55,000, it's one of the loudest football stadiums in America. So to go handle that environment for Nebraska will be really valuable. I'm not sure the game has quite as much importance as last year's game when it was at home and Nebraska had that class of 31 seniors where you kind of expected Nebraska to get it done. This one, I think the pressure's on Oregon, but a great opportunity for Nebraska to go out and try to steal an early one on the road.